First off, my congratulations go out to my fraternity brother, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. That's the first order of business, that he's an alpha man, graduated from Morehouse University. Same university Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. graduated from Morehouse College. Pastored the same church that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came out of in Atlanta, Georgia. And I've been to that church because the original church is now a museum. It's on the history tour. And there's a beautiful edifice that was built right across the street from it, of which that's where my good brother, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, pastors. And he took on the mantle of running for Senate in the state of Georgia, knowing the odds. And yet he beat the odds, because he is now the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia. So my congrats go to, as well as to John Ossoff. Both of them. John Ossoff is now the youngest senator to be elected since, interesting enough, see, this is where you got to see the parallels. This is where you got to see God at work. The youngest senator-elect since our now president, Joe Biden. So there hasn't been a senator at that age. I think it was 33, if I'm not mistaken. I'm almost sure it was 33, but I'll have to look to be sure. You can look it up if whatever it is. But I believe it's 33 that John Ossoff was elected, and he's the youngest now senator-elect since our now president-elect, Joe Biden. I'm trying to help you see the connections here and how God works things. So in Georgia, there was a connection between one who led the civil rights movement and the connection between now our president-elect. See, that's a little bit of knowledge for you, things that you may or may not know, or connections you may or may not have made, but now that you heard me say it, like, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. So that's my congratulations goes out to the state of Georgia for their integrity, even though they're still critical of the election, whoever that person is that the president wanted to cheat with, and he said no, he wasn't going to do it, because they said in the past he was willing to do it, so maybe that's why the president thought he would do it. But in any event, my hat goes out to them because they held their integrity. The state of Georgia, and they went through a lot, because my mother lives in Georgia and I have friends who live in Georgia, and they were sharing with me the madness of the constant barrage of telephone calls and the junk mail that was coming in their mailboxes for the runoff election. They were being called from all over the United States with folks trying to encourage them to vote one way or the other. My mother said it was relentless. It got to the point where sometimes I would call her and they wouldn't pick up the phone. And so many phone calls were coming in, they got tired of picking up the telephone. So it was relentless from particularly since Election Day in November up until January 5th. But lo and behold, John Ossoff as well as Raphael Warnock won. Now, let me tell you why I am thrilled in particular that they won, particularly in the case of Perdue, because he had the audacity to make fun of Kamala Harris's name in one or two of his speeches, probably more. Now, mind you, Perdue, Loeffler, and all of them served together. But Perdue, Loeffler, Harris, all of them were colleagues. So it's not like they didn't know each other. And yet he's going to get on a stage and start going, Kamala, la, 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 whatever her name is. So I am just thrilled that God saw forth that he didn't get back in, because, I had some fun with his name, too, with him being Perdue. I started calling him Perdue. Since he had to extend Kamala, la, 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 I had to extend Perdue. Instead of him just being Perdue, okay, that's Perdue. I mean, come on now. Let's get real here. You work with the woman, you know her name, and then you're going to get on stage and act like, because what he was doing was poking fun at the ethnicity, because Kamala is an ethnic name. So now he's going to try to poke fun at that. Like my daughter's name, Niara, Niara, Swahili for of high presence. So he's going to poke fun at Kamala by saying Kamala, la, 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 whatever her name is, knowing full well what her name is. And yet now he has a last name of Perdue, again, that folks could have a lot of fun with. So I was thrilled that he was beat. And then with Loeffler, she had her issues going on too, but whatever she's, because she, billionaire, quillionaire, whatever she is, kind of thought that, her stuff didn't smell, kind of had this attitude of, you know what, I'm all that in a bag of chips, ain't nobody going to beat me. Well, come to find out, both of them were beaten because the Georgians had said, we had enough of you two. All right. And I don't think the fact that our fearless leader went down there campaigning for them, which he really was campaigning for himself, really wasn't even campaigning because the election was already over. He was talking about himself. I don't think that helped the situation either. All right, so that's my commentary in terms of thoughts on Georgia. I am thrilled for that Morehouse College brother, for that Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity brother, greatest fraternity in the world, and for the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, that historic church where it started in terms of the civil rights movement. See, once again, the black church. Once again, I'll leave it there, but it's the change is coming out of the church. Okay, so that's Georgia. Then now we had the craziness on Tuesday. I refused to turn on my television on Tuesday. I really did, because first off, when the events were happening, I was in class with my students and teachers. That was during the day when everything was happening. But I started seeing on Twitter, on social media, some of the things that were going on. So even when the school day ended, I refused to turn on my television. But I kept up with, what was going on, again, through Twitter. I went upstairs because my office is in the bottom of the house. My wife's office is on the next level up. I get upstairs and my wife says, because my wife is from Jamaica and her family still lives there. And she said, because she was teaching as well, she hadn't watched TV either. She hadn't turned the television on, and she don't even follow social media the way I do. So she really didn't kind of know what was happening. She starts getting texts from her sister in Jamaica that said, what is going on in America? That's what her text messages were saying from her sister, because they could see on television the atrocities that were going on in our capital. And they started texting her saying, what is going on in America? Now, I share that story to say, if my sister-in-law in Jamaica was watching, can you imagine all the other countries around the world? England, Australia, Canada, China, Japan, Africa, whatever continent, island, country, wherever around the world was watching folks acting the fool. And the majority of the folks acting the fool looked one way. And then everybody noticed, because I had the opportunity to kind of debrief that with my students on yesterday, and even my students, and I only have grades 3 to 8, but my 5th graders and my 8th graders, I talked to those two classes in particular. Even they, without prompting, without solicitation, were able to differentiate the treatment of that group on Tuesday compared with the Black Lives Matter groups or any other immigrant groups or groups of color. They were able to tell for me in discussion and debrief how wrong, first off, the fact that we had, because that was not a protest, that was a riot, that was an attack. The only difference between that attack and September 11th, 2001 was those were in-house folks doing that. Those were Americans who were the terrorists. Compared with 2001, 9/11, they were outsiders who were the terrorists. And even my students were able to pick up on how those terrorists on Tuesday were treated compared to immigrant groups and people of color and black people and Spanish people whenever they're protesting peacefully. Because if you recall, the National Guard was called out on just folks walking. Folks weren't doing anything but walking. In one instance, folks were just standing, and some kind of chemical tear gas and pepper spray and even the dogs and everything were called out for folks who were just standing down there on that road whenever the president wanted to do the photo op in front of the church. Yeah. If you remember back there in the summertime, it was around 6, 7 o'clock. It had just started getting dark a little bit, and he wanted to do a photo op in front of this church, and there was folks standing there, and he had all the military force start spraying this chemical and everything else on those folks, and yet our Capitol was was overrun by a bunch of folks. Now, come on. I watched, because I did ultimately turn my TV on late Tuesday night as Congress and Senate went back into their chambers to certify those votes. I did turn it on then, and I watched some of the debate. But that was just a travesty and beyond a shame that you had folks that went down there. Now, this is the other thing that to me was like a little odd, because I don't know about those of you listening, but I was always under the impression that those buildings down there in Washington, D.C. was the most secure buildings on the planet. And yet you had a bunch of hicks who were able to go down there and overthrow it. Now, something's wrong with that picture, y'all. I don't know. I don't know, but something's wrong with that picture when you have buildings that's supposed to be some of the most secure place on the planet get overrun by a bunch of hicks. They would have had more trouble getting into Six Flags. They would have had more trouble overrunning Disney World than they did on Tuesday getting into that Capitol building. They climbed walls, busted doors, busted windows, and I saw one post where they actually defecated in there. Some of them had the audacity to pull down their pants and defecate and smeared it all along the floors and doors and walls in our Capitol building. These are buildings that whenever you're a regular, if you're just walking a tourist, that you can barely move, and yet they were overrun. Now, mind you, if I'm an enemy, if I'm an enemy country and I'm watching that, and I was like, oh, that didn't seem difficult at all. Something was wrong there, folks. Then as I continued to watch on videos and coverage, I start watching how they were treated. There was one lady, now I don't know because she literally got taken down the steps by the police officer like she was his grandmother. I mean, he grabbed her by the arm and they walked one step at a time and gingerly going down the stairs. And, you would have thought it was a love fest. And this is where my students picked up on, because one of them said, Mr. Medley, had that group been African American, that would have been no escorts. Now, this was out of the mouth of an 8th grader. There wouldn't have been no escort. They would have been kicked down those stairs or dragged down those stairs. And I could not argue with the young man. I could not argue with that 8th grader, because that's the sad fact, the sad truth here in America. There's a serious double standard. There is a serious double standard. And it was no more on display better than what we saw on Tuesday. How do you get into a Capitol building where the vice president, Congress people are? How do you get in there? How does that happen? How does that? And you have folks out there that think that's normalized this. They think this is normal. They think that was okay. They think that was right. Talking about patriots. Some folks, we got a lot of idiots out there because they have totally twisted the definition of patriot. I'm telling you here right now, what we saw on Tuesday, those were not patriots. Those were not patriots. That term should not be used for those fools that were down there on Tuesday. They were not, that is not the definition of a patriot. That was not patriotism that you saw on Tuesday. Please don't get that twisted. It was an ism, but it wasn't patriotism. Now, I'm going to put it away. It certainly was an ism. It certainly was an ISM at the end. But patriotism, it was not. There was nothing patriotic about that. They had pictures. And I know one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone touches my personal items, when someone breaches my personal space, because I've been burned like that before. I've been burned with somebody going into my personal items. I've been life-changing burned because of folks going into my personal items. So I'm very sensitive to that. So to sit there and watch a video or a photo of somebody that had broke into Nancy Pelosi's office and was sitting in her chair and had thrown stuff all over the place, had his feet up on her desk, and it's my understanding that that person is now in jail, I would prosecute him to the fullest extent of if that had been my office, because I shared that with my students. Think in terms of if it was our school building and somebody overtook that, came in here, went into my office and threw papers all over the place and was sitting at my desk and feet up on my desk. I hope Nancy prosecutes him to as far as the book can be thrown at him. I hope, because see, just that video, just that photo alone angered me to no end. To see him with his feet sprawled across her desk or a desk, her papers thrown all over the place, and then he had the nerve to come out and take a picture of himself outside with a letter that he had taken from her office. Now, I was incensed by that. I really was. To go in there and to see the photos of the offices that was destroyed and the windows and everything that was going on. Folks, let me tell you something. I'm going to be clear with you. That was not patriotism. That was not patriotism. Let me tell you what that was, and then I'll finish up because my guest will be coming on shortly. That was a bunch of folks who could not get their way, that was having a childish tantrum, just like their leader does. That was a bunch of folks who could not get their way. That was a bunch of folks who, in their mind, this notion of being disenfranchised. This is a bunch of privileged, entitled folks who believe that groups that look like them are taking something away that they're supposed to be getting. When the truth of the matter is, no, they're not entitled to anything. They're not privileged to anything. But in their minds, they feel as if all these other groups, the immigrant groups, the people who have skin color who are different from them, are taking from them, are taking jobs, are taking money, are taking this, or taking that. And that is as far from the truth as possible. But in their mind, they have this feeling of, quote unquote, being disenfranchised. That groups are taking away from, that they're entitled to this that other groups are now getting. That these things are supposed to be for me, and now I'm not getting it. And so because of that, I'm, odd man out. So that was a bunch of folks who couldn't get their way. So what they did was like the child that I saw the other day in TJ Maxx in the store. A couple days after Christmas, I was in the store to pick something up. This little boy went into a temper tantrum like you would not believe. And his mother was sitting in there, had the nerve to be trying to debate and reason with him. Oh, well, I just spent, do you know how much the toy I just bought you cost? Oh, you just got a whole bunch of that. And that little boy was lighting that store up because he could not get whatever that toy he'd picked up in his aisle. He was lighting that store up. Everybody in the store heard this child, and this mother was standing there looking silly and helpless. Rather than just saying, you're not getting that, you better shut that noise up. She's sitting there trying to reason. Well, that's what them folks were like on Tuesday. They didn't get their way. The election was what the election was. You're talking, it was something like 80 million or 81 or 82 million to 74 million. The last time I looked, 80 million is more than 74 million. Simple as that. There were more people who wanted this man out of office than there were who wanted him in. Simple as that. There was not that much fraud in the world. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million votes, 6 million votes. There was not that much fraud in the world. If that was the case, then if that's the case, we had fraud with Al Gore and George W. Bush. I mean, if you want to start getting into the fraud game and the numbers game, then we should have had this kind of activity going on with the Bush-Gore election. It just didn't make no sense. You had a bunch of people, I'm going to say it again, who didn't get their way. Then you have the poster child for disenfranchisement egging them on. Because see, again, you got to look at parallels. I was saying this earlier in terms of you got to look at the bigger picture. You just can't look at isolated events. You have now someone who's constantly saying, my election was stolen. The election was stolen. The election was stolen. Constantly pumping that message to people who feel like everything else is being stolen from them by other groups. So that message of something being stolen resonated. And because that message resonated, they connected. So even though he didn't have to say, go do this, go do that, they picked up, they knew that little rally was about Tuesday morning. And now you have, like I said, the poster child for disenfranchisement standing up there talking about something being stolen from him. All of them yahoos out there say, oh, yeah, we feel the same way, boss. This has been stolen from us. That job I was supposed to get, I didn't get because an African-American got it. This I was supposed to get, I didn't get because a Muslim got it. This I was supposed to get, a Latino got it. So yeah, they connected. They feel that message of something being stolen. Because like I said, you got a bunch of folks feeling disenfranchised, that something is being taken, that they're entitled to, that something's being taken away from them. Now, let me be clear. All Caucasian folks don't feel that way. I know that. All African Americans don't feel the same way. All Latinos don't feel the same way. All Asian folks don't feel the same way. All Muslims don't feel the same. I get that. But we also know what we saw on worldwide TV on Tuesday. Whole bunch of folks that didn't get their way. Differs from folks who are crying out over a man who was killed with another man's knee on his neck. Folks tried to say it was the same thing. Folks are protesting lives being taken versus rioting and attacking about an election that didn't come out the way they wanted it to come out. That's why we have elections. That's why we vote, so that the majority can say, this is who we want. The majority said we did not want this man we currently have. Because I told you one time before, to be honest with you, that election wasn't so much about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It wasn't so much about putting Biden in, because if you remember, Biden was not the popular candidate. So it wasn't so much about this love of Biden. The election was more about, we're tired of this nonsense, this daily chaos that we're going through as people in this country because of who is leading us. And those votes were not just African-American votes. Those votes were not just Latino votes. Those votes were not just Muslim votes. Those votes were not just Asian votes. Those votes were Caucasian votes as well. The American people was tired of the daily chaos. Now, there were 74 million who weren't tired of it. Okay, but there were more people who are tired of it. But they could not accept that. He could not accept that. So therefore, that's why we got what we got on Tuesday. It was a bunch of spoiled brats who didn't get their way, who, because they didn't get their way, said, we're going to tear it down. And had that been any other group, there would have been beat sticks flailing. There would have been guns going off. There would have been people being dragged. They would have been carting folks up out of there in trucks. And yet we saw folks being gingerly escorted down the stairs. Tell me it's not a double standard in America. It is. Oh, yeah, and we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. Well, that's my commentary. Tuesday was a sad day, another sad day in the history of America. America has a lot of wonderful days, but America has a lot of sad days also, and Tuesday was one of them. All right. That was my soapbox, my diatribe, my soliloquy, my monologue, whatever you want to call it. Tuesday was wrong. Tuesday was wrong for so many different reasons and in so many different ways. Buildings and places that I thought were the most secure places on the planet turned out to be easy to overtake. Overtaken by a bunch of hicks. Easy to overtake. Just walked right. It was like open gate. It was like the front line on the football team. Just let everybody in for that sack. Something to think about, folks. That's why we have to pray and keep praying. And then not only pray, but start acting. It needs to be denounced. Thankfully, it has been denounced up and down all over the place by various governors, school superintendents, mayors. It's been denounced. CEOs. But we got to do more than just denounce. We got to do more than just stand up and talk about how it was wrong. We got to start making some changes. One of my last blog posts got into this whole notion of it's the only thing that changed when we went from 2020 to 2021. If the only thing that changed was the last 2 digits in the year and hearts and minds stayed the same, guess what? We're going to get more of what we got in 2020. And right now, in the first 9 days, right now, it looks like the only thing that changes the last 2 digits in the year based on what I saw Tuesday. Something to think about, folks. And I'll leave you with that. It is definitely something to think about.